everyone. Welcome to the LiveProud podcast, powered by Evil Geniuses, a podcast where we will discuss important topics that impact the esports and gaming world day in and day out. Every episode, you'll get a chance to hear the thoughts, perspectives, and opinions from some of your favorite gamers, celebrities, and influencers. My name is Erin Ashley Simon, and welcome to episode 1. So today we'll be discussing the Black Lives Matter movement and the overall experiences of Black people within and outside of esports. I would like to first start off by welcoming my co-host, pro gamer Ricki Ortiz.
Hello.
Hello. As well as our special guests, activist and social impact consultant Jamira Burley and esports host Malik Forté. How's it going, guys?
Going great.
Super excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome.
Yes.
You're welcome. So let's get right into it. This has been a conversation even before the recent protests and the murder of George Floyd. But I want to start off with just all of our own contextual knowledge and information when it comes to the Black Lives Matter movement, as well as the punitive history of incarceration that's tied to this overall movement. Jamira, I would love to start with you, and especially as an activist who's super knowledgeable about this and has worked with so many different companies and individuals. What is kind of like the foundational information that everyone should know about BLM and more?
Yeah, what I first will say is, again, thanks for having me. I think this conversation is extremely important because what we're seeing is that, advocating for Black lives, talking about racial justice in this country bleeds into every single industry that we all interact with, and we all have a role to play in ensuring that we accomplish and get closer to the goals that we need. To put it into framing, I think it's really important to, one, recognize that when you talk about Black Lives Matter, the movement, the folks who are at the forefront, the demands in which we have, is to first recognize that this moment didn't start today. It didn't start yesterday. It didn't start in the last few months or even the last few years. This has been a movement since the very creation of this country, when you look all the way back to slavery and the recognition of how police and systems of oppression have been used to demonize, criminalize, and oftentimes imprison those who are from the African American community. And so a lot of the focus in recent years has been really recognizing that these systems that we all pay into as citizens are oftentimes used to harm us, and how can we make demands and recommendations and or abolish those systems to ensure that African Americans in this country can be as free as other races and individuals who participate in the society. And so what we're really advocating for is a recognition that police officers, since its very creation after the end of slavery during Jim Crow, have been created, in fact, to police the lives of Black and brown folks in this country. And then more importantly, how can we reinvest those dollars that have been traditionally used for policing in America to other institutions that actually would create more safer environments, such as education, mental health, workforce development. And so it's really inspiring to see folks who are getting more engaged in this process, learning more about racial justice in this country, and having more honest conversations around how systems, individuals have all perpetuated an ideology that oftentimes have not put the lives of Black folks center stage or enabled for them to be whole and healthy within the United States.
And Malik, you have been someone, when it comes to having these honest conversations, you've been someone who's been so vocal within the esports and gaming scene to the point where you even said, there's bigger things than this industry. There's more important things to talk about than this industry. So how have you been utilizing your knowledge and understanding of Black Lives Matter movement in terms of educating those within esports and gaming?
Well, it's very important for me. When you say educating folks, it's just me basically giving people my experience, especially in a space where, I'm a minority and I'm one of the few, and I'm sitting in a lot of boardrooms as the only Black male. This is my opportunity to educate folks, and this is my opportunity to be in those rooms and to teach people more about my culture. But what I think is really important about this particular space and me kind of using my platform is just using this moment that is Black Lives Matter as an awakening for folks. For a long time, I've been talking about these things and it's gone on deaf ears. But with Black Lives Matter and with this movement, It's charged up everyone, and it's got a lot of people wanting to learn and a lot of people opening up their ears and being willing to listen. So with this movement, I've been using all of the time that I can to talk to my friends, to talk to folks around me, and folks who aren't so much my friends, acquaintances and colleagues, and just anybody I can who's willing to listen. I'm trying to do my due diligence and share my experiences with them, so then they can take everything that they learn and pass this ideology on to other folks. This ideology of inclusiveness, of equality, and just everybody being on a level playing field. Especially interesting to see the gaming world, like the companies, get into this conversation because it's then forced a lot of folks who are used to being more negligent of civil rights issues to engage in the conversation, to really pick a side. I think that it is important that people do pick a side now. You're either racist or you're anti-racist. And I think that that message has been driven more than ever during these times. And that's why I feel like it's really important for me to educate people so they make the right decision.
Oh, I fully agree. I mean, as someone who works directly with advocating specifically for millennials and Gen Zs, like the data tells you that young people are so much more invested in where a company sits in regards to like their social impact, where they're investing their dollars, how are they showing up, what are their corporate values, and how that's displayed in their actual check. So I do agree. I think there's a tide changing, or turning, I should say, where companies are forced to really live in their truth and not allow themselves to, just do these one-off publicity stunts, but actually stand behind something.
And do we feel like during this time that, I mean, of course, change happens in varying different increments, but do we feel like more recently, because of quarantine and everyone is essentially like you can't run away from what's going on. There definitely have been some people who've either swept under the rug or just haven't really focused on it. Do you feel like true change can happen and will happen more from like the recent protests and what happened with George Floyd and everything like that? Like, what do you guys personally feel?
Yeah, I think it's a perfect storm. I mean, you have a time where millions of folks are in their homes, are working from home. And I think this has provided the opportunity for folks who felt before that they didn't have the bandwidth, that they didn't have the time to kind of protest, to get engaged. But I also think that, this is not even just an American issue. What we're now seeing is that a lot of companies are grappling with the same questions of racial inequality. And what it's showing is that America for so long has represented itself as the prima donna, right? The example for how the rest of the world needed to operate. And now where we're pulling back the layers and seeing that America has actually never lived up to its own full potential. So I do think now is a time for true change. The question is, how do we allow ourselves not to be distracted by the murals on the street or by the one-off checks, but what is like real substantial change that will lead us into a new direction?
And on top of that too, Malik, you and I have had conversations about, it's great that we're seeing these solidarity posts, especially when it comes to esports and gaming. But where could we see that change, and what would we like to see in terms of this change? This could be a question also for you, Ricki. I know that especially in esports and gaming, we always talk about the toxicity, especially when it comes to like Twitch chat and just overall, social media engagement and interaction. So right now, where could we potentially see, or where is it needed for this change to occur?
Well, as far as gaming goes, I feel like from the top level, it needs to start happening. We see these companies starting to get adept to these things when they start making more inclusive hires. But they do it at entry levels. They don't do it at executive levels. We need more people of color and more people from marginalized groups in leadership positions within the industry in order to start seeing some change, because those people are going to be the ones who empower others. Those people are going to be the ones who make those decisions that progresses us into a place where everybody is, like I said before, playing on a level playing field. And I think, Jamira, she put it perfectly. This is the perfect storm of all that happening. This has been one of the worst political climates that we've ever been in. So everybody's really charged up about voting. That's a way we can make a change. People are very cognizant of the types of companies that they're spending their dollars with. And I believe buying power is a huge here, especially in America. So I feel like in the gaming industry, though, it really starts with just getting those thought leaders in the right positions within the industry, and then we can start working towards some changes.
And Ricki, where do you feel like change is needed? I know when we discuss diversity, the FGC scene or fighting game community is very diverse compared to like the FPS scene. But there still could be improvement. There's still spaces that could be worked on. Where do you feel like the change is needed?
I think specifically for gaming, especially for big figureheads in gaming and fighting games specifically, I feel change should happen definitely with us. I feel like we should be more vocal about our LGBTQ, our black brothers and sisters, and help people gain knowledge about them. And especially I think it's about the whole like anonymity thing in Twitch chat. I believe that if there's any negativity ever in your Twitch chat, I feel like it's your responsibility as a creator to help weed out all the negativity and help ban people and just make it a point to say that basically you shouldn't be speaking this way, you shouldn't be talking this way, you shouldn't have this kind of negativity towards people in your chat, and you're not going to accept it. And there's a no, you just basically can't be talking about stuff like that. It's just not good, and I feel people should be more vocal about it, because I feel a lot of creators out there, when they see something negative towards a particular race or somebody's sexuality or whatever, people kind of just ignore it, and they just kind of let it fly by in the chat. But I feel like it's definitely an opportunity that we should take upon ourselves, that when we see something like that we should talk about it and be more vocal about it.
And with having those conversations, I mean, you're going to have these uncomfortable conversations, especially with people that you know, and we've been seeing that more recently. So this is for all of you. How did you guys go about having conversations about Black Lives Matter movement, as well as racism with some of your fellow friends who who aren't Black or who may not quite understand? Because especially when it's like one of those moments where people have to check themselves and check, maybe their own individual implicit biases or their own microaggressions that they have. So how have you guys been able to have these conversations with your friends and have it in a productive manner?
I think for me personally, I had to draw a little bit of inspiration from the conversations that I had with my mom and just most of the women in my life, because I'm born into my own systemic privilege in being a male. So there was a lot of stuff that I was indoctrinating on, as far as just like those microaggressions, certain things that I said, and certain ways that I treated women that I had to unlearn. I had to deprogram from myself. And that came with having strong women around me who constantly would check me on these things. My mom, my grandma, my little sister, currently my wife. I have tons of women around me who've checked me on this. So I kind of drew from them. When they sat me down and had these conversations, I never really felt like I was attacked. I felt like ultimately these were teachable moments that sometimes needed a little bit of force to get the point across. And I kind of just took from them and kind of molded that into when I had these conversations with a lot of my colleagues who are not Black. And honestly, for some folks, it's been a little bit tougher than others. For some folks, I'd had to really explain it to them like a 5-year-old. But long story short, I've always handled them with respect and with civility, and made sure that I was forceful about getting my point across, but very concise and very respectful.
And Jamira, for you, you've been able to have these conversations not only with people on social media, but everyone from political, figures and companies. So how have you been able to adjust those conversations?
Well, part of me hasn't been, right? Like, I've been trying to strike the balance between when is the most appropriate time for me to come in and have these conversations with folks, both in an individual personal level, but also recognizing on a professional level, this is physically, mentally exhausting to constantly having to talk about race, especially when oftentimes those conversations are with folks who don't understand what you're experiencing, don't understand your lived truth, and don't recognize that there are still people in this country that doesn't see you as human or doesn't value your life overall. And so I've been very intentional of ensuring I'm uplifting folks and voices of those who are professionals in this space, who do get paid and should be paid to facilitate these conversations, while also recognizing where can I come in and best help those who are interested in learning and interested in growing. Because I'm a firm believer that, you can't Google your way out of being anti-Black and being racist. You have to have those nuances conversations. You have to be willing to be uncomfortable and place yourself in uncomfortable situations. And so every day is a different day. And, you know, I celebrate those folks who embrace the moments of uncomfortability to still kind of push through and learn more and ask more questions, because that's where I think we're going to get to real solutions for change.
And I want to follow up with that point too. So how do, for you, Jamira and Malik, and you know, this is something that is, even for me, that's been quite an experience where you have to have that balance of, yes, I'll provide resources and help you, but also for me, I felt like it's not fully my responsibility to make this an easy journey, an easy researching and journey for you. You know, I feel like if you want to get better and be an ally, you should also actively put forth the effort to do so. So how have you guys personally found that balance of when to provide that resources, when to answer those questions, and when to be like, no, you need to figure this out on your own as well. You need to do the research on your own. Or sometimes just being like, I'm emotionally and mentally drained, so I cannot answer your questions today.
You know, every day is different. And I will say every relationship that you have with someone is going to be different. For me professionally, so the organization that I work with day in and day out, 9 to 5, I deliberately do not facilitate those conversations around race, especially being the only Black person within the organization, both domestically and internationally. And I think because the reason why I do that is because the organization already, me being there, me participating in those conversations, me trying to facilitate those conversations already creates a barrier of power, right? Who has the power? Who makes the decisions? And should I offend someone in that process while trying to correct someone, educate someone? I am at a disadvantage. And so I deliberately do not put myself in the space where I'm asked to facilitate those conversations. And also, that's not my job. Versus if it's someone that I am very close with externally, who is my friend or is a client externally of my 9 to 5, then I'm more than willing to facilitate those conversations. But I also put barriers on myself for how often I engage, the structures in which I engage, the ability to kind of navigate those spaces while also being conscious of my own self-care, I think is extremely important for anyone. But I will, again, remind folks who are interested, who want to learn, who want to be better, who want to be anti-racist, is to, one, making sure you ask for permission before going to your nearest Black person and expecting them to teach you all they know, or going to your coworker and asking them really uncomfortable and awkward conversations. Really try to figure out someone's level of vulnerability and wanting to engage in those conversations, but also recognize your own power dynamics and how that might make someone feel uncomfortable. But again, there are professionals who work in this space day in and day out. So you also have to be willing to make the investment of hiring the right folks, engaging the right folks, and paying the right folks to teach you what you need to know in this journey for all of us to be able to create a world in which we deserve.
Yeah. Right. Right. It's regressing back to our old ways, to put it bluntly. And I think that it's very important that, you know, in these conversations that we are having with folks, they do understand that we most of the time don't really feel like it. We don't feel like having these conversations. I said at the beginning of this podcast that I've been very vocal about these issues, and a lot of my concerns have fallen on deaf ears. It's exhausting. I mean, Jamira, she put it as clear as it could be. Another thing too to consider is, you know, this is not something that you should be doing for the thank yous, for the blessings, for any type of kudos, because at the end of the day, this is for yourself to be a better person, to have some human decency, to treat everybody as equal. That is something that is serving yourself. That is serving no one else. And so you should not be expecting anyone to tell you thank you for finding this information out for yourself. This is for you to correct a problem that your ancestors kind of messed up for everybody. So don't be mad at us when we don't really feel like talking about these things. This is an issue that non-Black people really need to hunker down and figure out on their own. And we will help as much as we can when it's all said and done, but it's not ultimately our responsibility to try to validate why, like Jamira said, we deserve our civil rights.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. And Ricki, for you, how has your experience been like navigating just conversations and learning more about what's going on as an ally?
For me, obviously I'm a transgender woman, so I have my own experiences, but it's like all this everything that's been happening has been extremely eye-opening for me and extremely crazy because I have so many close black friends who are like family to me, and just to see everything happen in the media right now just makes me so sad and disheartened because like who knows, someday something could happen to one of my close friends, and it's just terrible to see. And I try my best to use my social media platform to try to bring any kind of awareness I can and to help retweet and help bring awareness to everybody as much as I possibly can.
And Ricki, I would love for you to just talk about your experiences being a trans woman, and just if you have any conversations that you've had with other fellow Black trans women or even Black trans men, because that's also been a part of the overall conversation when it comes to Black Lives Matter movement, as well as just overall supporting the underserved communities. Do you mind sharing your own experiences and stories or even conversations you've had?
Yeah, sure. I have a couple of really great friends who are also transgender women in the community, and right now it's just I feel like it's such a scary time for them, especially because transgender women of color are so marginalized right now, and they're being killed so often. So I worry about them so much, and I always check up on them just to see if everything's okay with them and how they're doing. And they're always saying that like this time is crazy for them, that they're scared to go out, and they don't want to end up being hurt. And I just think it's so insane right now that they have to feel that way. And I'm here for them any way that I can be, and I'm always checking up on them to see if everything's fine with them, and just check on their mental state and their mental health to see if everything's okay with them.
And talk about mental health. What do you guys think is the important aspect of the interconnection, intersectionality of mental health with what's going on and just the overall conversation?
Well, I think that, it's no coincidence that at a time where we're investing millions of dollars in policing, in the militarization of policing, and so many other forms of reactive policies like mass incarceration, a lot of the money for mental health, a lot of the money for social services for communities who are directly impacted by many of the issues that have been highlighted so far has been sucked out of those communities. And so my concern is constantly, how do we ensure that we as a country, we as a community, we as individuals are being as proactive as possible in providing people the resource that they need to be able to deal with the harsh realities of which they live, and the harsh realities in which their identity places them in as a Black person, as a Black woman in this society. And so I think mental health plays a huge role, and we have to create space for people to be able to talk about those issues in a way where they can find healing and reconciliation, while also ensuring that we have to make the investment on the local level and the national level to ensure that we're removing the stigma around mental health, and we're actually encouraging people to seek more help earlier versus waiting for something to happen or something to happen again. And that's not just for the Black community, but also for our white counterparts, right? Racism impacts all of us. It creates an environment where we all don't thrive. I think it's really important to recognize that the 2008 financial crash happened because of racism, right? Because the lenders were providing subpar loans to the Black community. And when it all came crashing down, we all paid the price, not just Black folks, but white folks too, lost millions of dollars, lost their investments, lost their retirements. And so that does something to your psyche. And so I think it plays a huge role, and we have to ensure that we're forcing the government, we're encouraging the government to make those investments early on so that our young people can thrive and our young people can be able to move throughout society without that weighted baggage of their lived experiences, but also the generational trauma that we've inflicted on them.
Malik, what are your thoughts?
No, I definitely agree. It's really hard to gauge mental health, the mental health of any Black person, because there are so many traumas that are stacked on top of each other. And for me, I try my best to just talk and converse with as many folks about these matters and exchange feelings with my fellow Black friends. And we try to just get everything out on the table as much as possible, and just have open communication on things. Even with our non-Black allies, open communication, it does help a lot and put our minds at ease during these tumultuous times. But it's really hard to say exactly what it is or where your head's going to be from day to day, because there's always something else that will throw you in a different direction. And I think the best thing for everybody to do is just make sure that they are out there speaking with family, speaking with friends and folks close to them about these matters, and keeping that line of communication open and frequent.
But part of that communication also that I find difficult is that even sometimes when people want to be supportive, they don't understand that there are certain words or how they phrase what they're saying can come across as discrediting towards the Black experience. And so, for you guys, what have been some examples of conversations that you've had where you've noticed those discrediting comments and moments? I know, for example, one of those has been, oh, I'm for the protests, but, there is looting and this and that. And it's always like that but instead of just saying, I'm for the peaceful protests and just leaving it at that. So what have been those experiences for you guys when it comes to these discrediting comments or moments?
I mean, there's tons of that, like the I'm not racist, but there's been a ton of those. The ones that get on my nerves the most are when we actually do achieve some type of like promising feat or some greatness or some Black excellence of there's always the word actually attached to it. Like, for instance, for me, I had some success in my career as a desk host for Esports, and then there was a whole Reddit thread that said, oh, Malik can actually host a desk. Like just because I'm Black, that's an ability that I don't possess. Things like that, it's like a microaggression, right? It's something that it's like there's so many undertones to saying that just because I'm Black, I can't achieve something that any of these white men can. And, it's already bad enough that I have to work 5 times harder to get in these positions just to have my work discredited. So, I feel like that for me, I've always pointed out those type of comments. When people make any remark to me of that nature, I'm very quick to jump on them in real time and tell them why that is problematic.
Yeah, I think you've made a really great point, Erin, because I think one of the things that frustrates me is when people talk about the idea that people should have the ability, the right to protest, but they're against the looting and they're against the destruction of property. I think it's really important for us all to ask in ourselves, why do we put so much value on property and not on life? And why don't we recognize that these folks, these billion-dollar companies and industries have insurance? They'll be fine. Let's focus on the fact that there are people dying in the streets. And unfortunately, because this has been going on for generations, for decades, how do you expect an oppressed group to respond to violence that have been inflicted on them without also displaying some level of violence themselves? In addition to that, one of the things that I always hate that people try to discredit the movement is that they say, what about Black on Black violence, right? Well, fun fact, that actually does not exist in a vacuum. Violence happens oftentimes in social economic classes. So white folks living amongst themselves in the suburbs, they're more likely to commit violence against each other. Asian community living together in either Chinatown or other parts of the community are more likely to commit violence against each other. So it's natural then that also Black people who mostly live amongst Black folks, that if violence is going to occur, it's going to happen amongst themselves. And so I think it's really important for folks to not get deterred from the issue at hand, while also recognizing there are folks fighting for the end of gun violence in communities of color. That's how I started my activism career, is ensuring that folks who look like me wasn't committing crime amongst themselves. But we also have to recognize it's even more problematic when the government in which we provide funding to, we pay our taxes into, the government in which that is supposed to protect us, have now placed armed guards at our front doors who are telling us how to live our lives and oftentimes inflicting violence against us for unjust reasons. And so, yeah, people are going to try to discredit the movement, but hopefully people are smart enough to, at this point, recognize that there is no justification for George Floyd to have someone sit on his neck for 8+ minutes. There's no justification for that. There's no justification for a police officer, a group of police officers barging in Breonna Taylor's home and firing first and asking questions later, and then surprised without identifying themselves, without presenting a warrant, surprised when the boyfriend reacts to that violence. And so, I think it's an important time for folks. The information is available. Their experts are available for folks to get beyond just these very small criticisms that oftentimes aren't reflective of what actually is happening. They're factual oftentimes, but they are in a bubble and not really taken into consideration of all the other factors that contribute to violence, and specifically in specific communities at any given time.
And these narratives and these stereotypical narratives and that people place upon Black people, people tend to do that with a lot of the underserved communities, whether you're a woman, whether you're trans. Ricki, have you had any moments where someone has placed some sort of stereotype narrative on you or your successes?
Initially, as a professional gamer, I used to identify as in 2013 as a gay male, even though I knew I was transgender. I just haven't came out yet. And back then, everything was always about my game, about me just being a good player, just about my skill. But as soon as I transitioned and people started seeing changes in me and in my physicality, it soon went to a stereotype of, like she looks good or she looks ugly, and it went so much more towards my appearance than to my gameplay. And I feel like that's such a common thing in the gaming world, where people want to play stereotypes against women, where it's not about how skillful they are, or it's about, like, you're good for a girl but you're not as good as guys. And I feel that stereotype pretty much hit home for me when I started transitioning, because people, all of a sudden, my skill took a backseat and my physicality and my looks took a front seat. And I feel like it really shouldn't be that way. It should always be about your skill in gaming, because you're competing at a professional level for a reason, not because of how you look. It's because of how good you are in the game.
Yeah, and a lot of times those things happen, especially within like the chat sections, not only in game but also within platforms like Twitch. And this question is for Malik and Ricki. Starting with you, Malik. What I feel like we're at a point in time where any publishers, devs, or even platforms that say that they are working on in-chat reporting, I feel like at this point it's kind of an excuse. Like, we've been knowing that this has been a part of the problem when it comes to the toxicity within esports and gaming. And I feel like now it's like, it's kind of like put your money where your mouth is. Like, this needs to get fixed. So with, I guess my overall question with that is, do you feel like the chat section or the anonymous accounts contribute heavily to the overall racism within esports and gaming, or just the prejudice nature of esports and gaming? And is that a good spot to start with in terms of fixing first, or do you feel like it has to start on a deeper level before we even get to that point?
I mean, I feel like we definitely need to start on a deeper level. I do think like this issue is very deep rooted, but the chat is in the people's ability to be anonymous is a problem on the internet, period, right? It's the reason why there's so many toxic folks. And in gaming in particular, since it's such a white male's club, that opens the door for the racism. That opens the door for the bigotry. It opens the door for it even more so than anywhere else that you might experience it when it comes to just like games or sports or anything like that. So for me, I think that definitely needs to be something that we start focusing on a little more. We need to find out a way to get everybody's name out there. I do like some games will require your accounts to like be attached to like social media accounts and stuff like that. And there are little things that some companies have tried to do, but I don't know ultimately what the solution is, because there's a lot of things about being able to remain private on the internet. I don't feel like that's an option that we need to lose yet. There has to be like some type of like middle ground where folks they have to commit to like, actually showing up and actually being themselves and not just some anonymous anime character, but at the same time not having to put out all their business. But to answer your question, Erin, because I kind of went on the tangent there, I do think that completely adds to it. And I hope that we can find some type of middle ground so where everybody doesn't feel so safe to throw out those bad remarks.
And Ricki, what are your thoughts on that middle ground, or just overall in-game and streaming chats?
Oh man, I've always said that because I feel like in general, I feel the great thing about the FGC is I feel the fighting community is such a diverse space, and especially towards black people and LGBT people inside the community. I feel like there's so many amazing black players and LGBT players, but I feel like the FGC gets such a bad name for itself because of all the Twitch chats and all like the Reddit boards and people just being anonymous and saying what they feel they can just say without having any kind of consequences. And I feel like that's a huge problem for the FGC in particular, just because when people see that, I feel they get such a bad image and representation of the fighting community when they see Twitch chat and people say negative things about me or just any other LGBTQ or any other black person playing video games, or saying like, oh, like there's only one black champion, but there's so many Japanese or other champions. But it's like you can't discredit someone like that, and you also shouldn't be able to be calling people these negative names online and just being anonymous, because I just feel like it's such a bad look. And I feel like I'm not really not sure on how we can fix that, but I really do think that is a really big issue just in gaming in general.
Jamira, when it comes to activism and just some of the companies that you work with, how has the conversation around social media and how we've seen platforms, quote unquote, regulate some of these hate speeches and speeches that we see, especially targeted towards black people? What is the overall thoughts or conversations that you've been having surrounding that and Black Lives Matter and just overall just improving that space?
Well, that's a really great question, Erin. And I think what we're grappling with both in the activist space, because one, there's a really great thing about social media is the ability to provide anyone in this country with the mic to be able to voice their concerns and be able to hold folks accountable. Unfortunately, that also provides all of the trolls the same ability. And we know that anonymity oftentimes gives people the the green light to say whatever that they're going to say, very hurtful and harmful things that they wouldn't say in person, and that they wouldn't say oftentimes when they use their real identity. And so I think it's really important that as technology companies, as social media platforms try to create technologies and platforms that enables for all of us to have a voice and to be able to connect with each other, that they also provide some level of accountability for folks who misuse that technology. If folks cannot say those things in person in real life, why should they be able to say that online without any justification that oftentimes may stroke violence, may be harmful to someone's mental health? And at the very least, it's just distasteful, and it doesn't create a safe and welcoming environment for anyone to be able to cultivate. And so I think the responsibility has to lie with institutions like Facebook and Twitter and Snapchat and TikTok to be able to create an environment where folks can feel that they can say what needs to be said to raise awareness, but that it's not harmful to any particular community and that's not stroking violence or stroking hate in any way. And so I do think the tide is turning with that. I do think there's a lot of pressure externally from local social justice organizations that are asking companies to take back their advertising dollars from many of these platforms that are not creating the ecosystem for us to eliminate hate speech. And it's interesting to see how a lot of social media platforms are responding. Some are responding very positively, while others are slow walking this as many people are harmed and hurt in the process.
And identity issues not just about, being anonymous as well. I think that also there are identity issues when it comes to people of color, especially with this one phenomena that happens to us throughout various moments in our careers, imposter syndrome, right? And for those who don't know what imposter syndrome is, it's basically a collection of feelings that one gets of inadequacy, and it persists even despite the fact that there's evidence of that person being successful or being good at what they do. And that's something that I'm sure we've all experienced and throughout, like I said, various points in our careers or just our lifetime. And so Malik, have you ever had an imposter syndrome or an experience within that? And can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it really comes from code switching, which is a survival mechanism. I learned at a very young age, if the cops ever stop you, change the tone of your voice. Make sure you speak to them politely. If you're ever in a room full of, white folks and you feel like you're threatened or like they might call the cops on you or they feel threatened, try to put them at ease. Like there's been so much of that type of stuff of, being, because I grew up in Ohio. So like I kind of was just pushed into that kind of thought process. And after a while, you do code switching, and when you don't even know it, it just happens, just impulsively. And then you do it, and you don't feel like you're not being yourself. And that's when the imposter syndrome kicks in. It's like, wow, like I'm not even like really 100% like owning, all these actions and these words that are coming out of my mouth. It's just kind of like me just trying to be safe. And I feel like, it takes a little bit of self-reflection to actually get over that once, it's been ingrained in you at such a young age. And I feel like there's a lot of black folks out there who at a very young age have, kind of adapted this without even knowing, just because it's just something that our ancestors and, our predecessors have adapted into their livelihood just so they can stay alive.
Yes, indeed. And Malik, thank you so much for telling us about your experience. I know you have to go right now. So I just want to first off by saying thank you so much for speaking with us and letting us know about your personal experiences. And then is there any last note that you would like to add before you have to go?
No, everybody keep fighting and keep pushing on. I know that it seems like things are getting quiet as far as like the social media aspect of this whole movement, but a lot of us are still charged up and fired up about making some change. So everybody keep that same energy.
Yes, keep that same energy and keep the conversation going, which we will do right now. So Jamira, for you, has there ever been an instance where you had to overcome imposter syndrome?
I mean, every day, unfortunately enough. Every day I deal with some level of imposter syndrome because unfortunately the spaces and places that I work and operate in, I am often the youngest, and have been for the last decade. I'm often the only woman, and I'm often the only person of color, whether I'm talking about social justice here in the US, particularly as it relates to like the intersectionality between social impact and social good. I'm oftentimes the only. And then in the development space, I'm oftentimes the only African-American and the only African-American from the African-American person. I'm also the only African-American. And so I constantly struggle with trying to, one, let folks understand that I deserve to be here, that I have something to share, that I have something to add that's worthwhile, that I have ideas that can help to shift policy, and that's me bragging. And also I think it's really important that at the same time, I constantly hold those folks accountable for why they're making the assumptions about why I'm not qualified to be in those spaces and show up oftentimes in spaces that were not created for me. And it over the years, it's gotten much easier to do this work, to know that I deserve to be in those spaces. But, I think as a millennial, we constantly battle with it because we look on social media and someone else is doing something more amazing and you feel like you should be a part of it, or you're doing something and it only has to take one person to question that for you to start feeling like, well, do I deserve it? Why didn't this person get it? Why did I do? So, it's a constant battle of trying to figure out how you fit in that space. But I've gotten so much better at recognizing that I too am worthy of being in those spaces.
And Ricki, have you ever had any moments of imposter syndrome when it came to your pro career?
Yeah, for sure. Just being a transgender woman in general, especially when I wanted to get into streaming, because I'm a very private and I'm a very shy person. So I felt that when I'm getting into streaming, I'm putting myself out there in the world, and I feel like I have to act a particular way. I feel like I have to act like the perfect female, the perfect woman, have a cute and girly voice, and just play that stereotypical role. And I would find myself being that when I stream, and that's just not who I am. Like, I'm a transgender woman, but doesn't mean I have to be girly and extremely hyper feminine at all aspects of streaming and of my life. So I would always find myself like struggling to not be that way, and it took me a while to overcome that. I feel, because I would always think about all the comments people would say, and people would type in the chat, and it would just get under my skin. So I had to really like shut that off and just like remember just to be myself and just to not let those comments and let that negativity get to me.
Oh yeah, 100%. I mean, even for me, like I kind of go through that as well. Like compared to other esports hosts, like I'm not a super feminine host, and so I definitely get people who are judging me based upon my looks, whether it's because I have short hair, they assume what my sexual orientation is. They will, they say some horrible comments just based off of how I look. And I think that, unfortunately within esports and gaming, there is such a different set of standards, especially qualification standards that are placed on women and especially people of color in this space, but the same way that it is placed out on other industries. Now, Jamira, how have you seen, or what are some examples that you've seen or know of where someone who is, whether a black woman or a black man, and they're receiving these separate set of qualification standards compared to their white counterparts?
I mean, we can look at the last election, right? It's so interesting, and love or hate Hillary Clinton, cool, have that feeling. But I think when we talk about resumes, right? When we talk about folks who are qualified for the job, Hillary Clinton was the most qualified person in history to run for president. That's just a fact. Her education, her professional career, her breadth of knowledge of not just domestic issues, but internationally, she was the most qualified person to run for office. And yet you had this man who had never been in office, who has never been accountable to the public in any way, seen as a more qualified person, or at least by many of the voters who voted for him. And so I think there's been many examples in politics, particularly when you look at AOC, who ran for office and now is elected as one of the youngest members of Congress, how people view her and some of the things they've said about her, just for her being bold and her willingness to push back and question folks. If that was a man, they would praise his ballsiness. They would praise his tenacity, and they would praise his willingness to kind of speak up on behalf of folks. But she doesn't get nearly as much opportunity to be able to be praised for those same actions. And so I've seen that many times in my career. I've also been told that I'm too loud, that I talk too much, or when I don't talk enough, people question whether or not I'm paying attention. And so every single day, we know that folks are judged by how they look when they walk into spaces on whether or not they're qualified to do the job that they've been brought up to do. Or even people have been judged by their names in the application process, whether or not they'd be getting an interview for a particular job or a position. And so we see those biases taking root in every single aspect of our lives. That's why it's not enough to just paint murals in the street. We have to actually shift the culture. We have to retrain our minds. People aren't born racist. People are not born with these biases. We as society teach them to them. And so that we have to rethink how our educational institution is holding folks accountable, telling the real story of America, while also holding folks accountable for the things that they do and things that they say that are harmful to other communities for no other reason than the fact that someone looks differently than you, or someone has a different sexual orientation than you.
We talked about different qualification standards that we see within society, that unfortunately, people are criticized a lot more, have very little room for errors, like Black women and people of color compared to other counterparts. Especially for you as a trans woman, have you personally experienced, or have you seen where certain pro players or just the scene, there's been different standards placed on those who are people of color or who are trans or who are part of the LGBTQ plus community compared to, per se, a white counterpart or an Asian counterpart or anything like that?
Oh, I've definitely seen instances like that, especially with speaking in terms of me particular, like me particularly before I transitioned. Like if I had lost a tournament, or or I just was not playing like myself, people would be like, oh, like Ricki had a bad day. We all have bad days every now and then. But now after I transition and I become a female, people are like, oh, like Ricki's no good anymore because Ricki's emotional and Ricki is on hormones, and that's gonna make her play differently. So she's not as good as she was when she was a male, and I feel like that's just not true at all. Like that shouldn't be the defining factor, as into just because you're a male, you're automatically better, and that's not the case, because I'm still the same person that I've always been. My mind is still exactly the same, and I still have the same skill I had. Why does it all of a sudden become me being a more emotional is the reason why I lost versus me just having a bad day, like say any other guy?
Yeah, and having these conversations and us expressing our own personal experiences, hopefully it will change those who are listening and having them understand their own implicit biases or prejudice that they have of others. But I want to end this podcast on a positive note because I feel like with so much that's going on, it's always important for us to stay positive at the end of the day. So I want to ask you guys, who is an amazing Black creator or Black pro gamer or someone within activism who is that you guys would like to highlight for their work, for their content, or anything like that? I want to end on a good note. Ricki, we'll start with you first.
I personally want to highlight, his name is Victor Woodley, and his name is Punk the God, and he is a champion amongst champions for the current most popular fighting game. It's Street Fighter V, and he is the reigning world champion. He is the best right now, and I feel like his work in game is so amazing, and he's just the definition of an amazing player, and he's so awesome. Yeah, and then also, of course, he couldn't be here with us today, but Sonic Fox is an amazing champion and an amazing ally and an amazing person to talk to because he is out there fighting the good fight and always talking about activism and just great overall.
Jamira, do you have someone that you like to highlight?
Yes, I'll shift gears because as someone who works particularly with companies, I think it's really important that we also highlight them too, because what companies do, the trends that they set oftentimes fuel into what happens on the ground. And so I think it's really important to recognize there's been a lot of gaming companies like Epic Games, like Sony Interactive, and PlayStation that have put out not only statements, but have actually made donations to relevant advocacy organizations that are fighting against racial justice. And I think once we have institutions like the gaming industry, not only making those type of statements and making those type of actions, it will bleed into how gamers are showing up on their platforms and in their games. And so it's really important that we work in collaboration with those institutions who have the power to shift the culture and to really make bold statements to move our entire country in the right direction.
Yes, and one person I would like to highlight, I just came across her actually not too long ago, Lizette Montgomery. She is an art director, game developer, also a diversity advocate, has been doing immense things within gaming as a Black woman. And for me, that's so great because growing up, there weren't too many women of color or even Black women that I've seen on such a mainstream and big level within the gaming industry. And so just to see people like her who's been around for a long time and who's actively speaking out about her personal experiences and really pushing for diversity is super, super amazing. So I want to say, Ricki and Jamira, and also Malik, who unfortunately had to hop off.
Yes, thanks for having me.
Thank you guys so much for this great and enlightening conversation. I felt like it was super needed on so many levels, and hopefully like people will be encouraged to continue the conversation even after listening to this.
Yes, thank you for having me, and thank you for conversating with me. It was an amazing time.
Yes, thanks for having me. It was truly fun. It's not oftentimes I get to chat with some awesome gamers about like the intersectionality of the issues that are impacting all of us and how, these things are not separate. They're deeply related, and we have to ensure that we have uncomfortable conversations anywhere and everywhere.
You're welcome. All right, guys, for all the listeners who are tuning in, remember, like I said, the conversation does not end with this episode. Continue to talk with your friends, family, community members about how you can be a better ally, or if you like to prefer, accomplice, and how we can make esports and gaming a better space for everyone. Stay tuned for the next episode of LiveProud podcast powered by Evil Geniuses. Once again, my name is Erin Ashley Simon, and we will catch you guys later.